3 months after the Battle of Sereth Prime, the Galactic Communion assembled in the Great Chamber on the neutral station of Consensus Point. Representatives from 200 species gathered to hear testimony about what had happened and what would come next. High Counselor Soren Kieth stood before them all, his feathers carefully groomed and his voice steady despite the emotions that churned inside him. Because he had been chosen to speak for his people, and he would not let them down. 3 months ago, my species faced extinction. He began. The Keth Dominion came to harvest us like grain, to process our bodies for biological resources, to erase 12,000 years of culture and art and philosophy as if it meant nothing. He paused to let those words sink in. We sent distress calls to every species in this assembly, and most of you responded with words, with committees, with promises to investigate after we were all dead. Some of the representatives shifted uncomfortably, but Soren did not care about their discomfort. And then the humans came. He activated the display behind him and showed the recordings from those desperate days. The civilian ships arriving one by one, the battle against impossible odds. The military fleets emerging from hyperspace like avenging angels. They did not send diplomats to discuss the situation. They did not form committees to debate the proper response. They did not calculate the strategic value of saving us. His voice rose with passion. They simply came. Miners and doctors and soldiers and teachers. Ordinary people from a world that should have killed them 1,000 times over. They heard our call for help, and they answered it with everything they had. The chamber was silent. I asked them why. I asked them again and again, because I could not understand what drove them. What madness made them cross the galaxy to die for strangers? Soren's voice cracked slightly, and they looked at me as if I had asked why water flows downhill. As if the answer was so obvious that my question made no sense. You called for help. They said as if those 4 words explained everything. He turned to face the human delegation, where Ambassador Park Ji-an sat surrounded by officers and diplomats and ordinary citizens who had volunteered for the rescue mission. And I finally understood. Humans do not help because it profits them. They help because someone needs help. They cannot hear a cry of distress and do nothing. It violates something fundamental in their nature, something that evolved on their deadly world, where survival meant protecting each other at all costs. And now they extend that protection to the entire galaxy. Soren stepped down from the podium, and the chamber erupted into questions and demands and arguments. But he did not stay to answer them because he had said what needed to be said. Ambassador Park met him outside the chamber. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for telling our story." "It is not your story," Soren replied. "It is our story now, yours and mine, and it will be told for 1,000 years. He hesitated before asking the question that had been weighing on him. What happened to the Keth? Park's expression hardened. The Keth Dominion no longer exists as a political entity. Our fleets tracked them to their home systems and gave them a choice. Release all prisoners, dismantle all harvesting infrastructure, submit to war crimes tribunals, or face the full response of humanity. And they chose. They chose surrender. Soren nodded slowly, feeling no satisfaction in the destruction of those who had tried to destroy his people. Only a weary relief that it was finally over. What happens now? Now we rebuild, Park said. Your world, your people, everything the Keth tried to take. And we will help because that is what we do. On Sereth Prime, the reconstruction had already begun. Human engineers working alongside Volanti architects to rebuild the cities that had been destroyed. Human doctors training Volanti medical students in techniques that could save lives that would otherwise be lost. Human teachers sharing knowledge that the Volanti had never imagined. And in a training center near the capital city, Private Kim Taejung taught a class of Volanti volunteers the basics of emergency response. Because the avian people had decided that they would never again be helpless when disaster struck. They would learn to answer calls for help. They would learn to be like the humans who had saved them. A Volanthi child approached Taijin after class. The same child whose life Dr. Yun Hanna had saved in the medical tent during the battle. And she held a piece of paper in her delicate hands. "I made this for you," she said shyly. Taijin took the paper and looked at the drawing. A picture of human ships forming a protective barrier around a planet. Their weapons blazing against enemies that tried to harm the world below. Above the image, the child had written a phrase in both Volanthi script and basic English. "Help is coming." Taijin felt tears prick at his eyes, and he knelt down to the child's level. "This is beautiful," he said. "Thank you. Is it true?" the child asked. "Will help always come?" Taijin looked at her innocent face and thought about everything humanity had done and everything they would continue to do. The fleets that would answer any call, the volunteers who would travel any distance, the ordinary people who would risk everything to protect strangers. "Yes," he said, "help will always come. That is what humans do." He framed the drawing and hung it in the training center, where every Volanthi volunteer could see it. And it became the symbol of the Volanthi Emergency Response Corps, the first non-human organization to adopt the Deathworlder philosophy, because humans had taught the galaxy. Something it had forgotten: civilization was not measured by technology or territory or wealth. Civilization was measured by how quickly you answered when someone called for help. And now the Volanthi would answer too, and after them, other species would follow. Inspired by the example of the Deathworlders, who could not ignore suffering, who could not stand by while innocents died, who came running every single time someone needed them. The galaxy was changing. It was becoming kinder, it was becoming braver, it was becoming more human. And across the stars, whenever disaster struck and hope seemed lost and all seemed dark and desperate, the same message would spread from world to world, spoken in 100 languages by 1,000 species who had learned what those words truly meant. Help is coming. The Deathworlders are on their way, and they will never ever stop. Admiral Quan Yunji stood on the bridge of the dreadnought, eternal vigilance, and surveyed the battlefield with cold, calculating eyes, taking in the scattered human civilian vessels that had been holding the line, the damaged Keth warships that had clearly not expected such resistance, the planet below where millions of innocent lives hung in the balance. She had served in the United Earth Navy for 40 years and had seen every kind of conflict the galaxy could offer. Border disputes and pirate raids and first contact scenarios gone wrong. But she had never felt the kind of fury that burned in her chest right now. The Keth were harvesting civilians. They were harvesting children. "All ships," she said, a voice cutting through the command channel like a blade. "Formation Delta, protect the evacuation corridor. Weapons free on any Keth vessel that approaches the planet." The second rapid response fleet moved like a living thing. 100 warships flowing into position with the precision of dancers, performing a routine they had practiced 1,000 times. And the civilian vessels that had been fighting alone for hours fell into formation alongside them as if they had always belonged there, because they had on Earth every civilian vessel trained for emergency response, practiced coordinating with military forces, learned to fight and defend and protect, because humans understood that safety was everyone's responsibility, and that when disaster struck, there was no time to figure out who should do what. The Keth Fleet Commander Thasik watched the human military ships arrive and finally understood the magnitude of his error, because these were not cargo vessels with mining lasers. These were purpose-built instruments of war crewed by professionals who had spent their lives preparing for exactly this moment. "All ships fall back," he ordered. Defensive formation around the harvester transports. It was the right tactical decision, but it came too late. Because Admiral Quan had not come to fight a battle, she had come to end a threat. and she had no intention of letting the Keth escape with their stolen prisoners. Target the harvester transports, she commanded. Disable their engines, but do not destroy them. There are Volanthi civilians aboard, and I want them rescued alive. The human fleet opened fire with weapons that had been designed by a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of killing. Weapons that drew on physics and engineering and pure destructive creativity that no other species could match. Weapons built by Deathworlders who had never known a moment of true safety in their entire evolutionary history. Keth warships began dying. On the planet's surface, Dr. Yun Hana worked frantically in the medical tent she had established near the refugee camp. Her hands steady despite the exhaustion that threatened to drag her down because there was no time to rest when patients kept arriving. The Volanthi were so fragile compared to humans. Hollow bones that shattered under impacts that would barely bruise human flesh. Respiratory systems that collapsed under stress. Bodies that seemed designed for beauty rather than survival, but they were people. They were thinking, feeling beings who loved their families and dreamed of the future and did not deserve to be harvested like crops. Hana had trained for this. Had spent years learning to treat species with radically different biology. Had pushed herself to the absolute limits of human medical knowledge. And now she used every bit of that training to save lives that should have been beyond saving. A Volanthi child lay on the operating table with injuries that would have killed her hours ago if the human medical team had not arrived. And Hannah worked with steady hands to repair damage that her teachers had told her was impossible to fix. "Doctor," her assistant said quietly, "her vital signs are stabilizing." Hannah allowed herself one moment of relief before moving to the next patient. Outside the tent, Private Kim Taejin and his squad held the perimeter against Keth ground forces that kept probing for weaknesses. Soldiers in heavy armor carrying weapons designed to harvest and capture rather than kill cleanly. The humans killed them anyway. Taejun had been a Marine for 3 years and had seen action twice before. Small skirmishes on colony worlds where the stakes had never felt this high. But nothing had prepared him for the rage that filled him when he saw what the Keth did to their prisoners. They were monsters, and monsters needed to be stopped. The battle in orbit reached its climax. As more human fleets arrived, the 3rd and 4th and 5th rapid response fleets emerging from hyperspace and adding their firepower to the assault, overwhelming the Keth with sheer numbers and superior coordination. Fleet Commander Thasik realized he was going to lose. Not just this battle, but everything. The humans were not going to let him retreat and regroup. They were not going to accept surrender and process prisoners through some bureaucratic system. They were going to hunt him down and destroy him because he had threatened innocent lives, and that was something humans could not forgive. He ordered his remaining ships to scatter, to flee in different directions in hopes that some might escape. Admiral Kwan had anticipated this. "All ships pursue," she ordered. "I do not want a single Keth vessel leaving the system." The human fleet split into hunting packs and ran down the fleeing Keth ships one by one. And Kwan felt no mercy for them because they had shown no mercy to the Volanthi, had treated intelligent beings like livestock, had built an entire civilization around the harvesting of weaker species. This ended here. This ended now on the flagship Eternal. "Vigilance," the communications officer reported an incoming transmission. "From the Keth command ship. They are requesting terms of surrender," she said. Kwan considered for a moment. Before responding, "Tell them we accept their unconditional surrender," she said. "They will power down all weapons and prepare to be boarded. Any ship that resists will be destroyed. Any ship that attempts to escape will be destroyed. Any ship that harms a single prisoner will be destroyed." "Admiral," her first officer said quietly, "is that within our authority? These creatures have harvested millions of civilians from dozens of species." Kwan replied, her voice cold. They have committed crimes that have no name in civilized law, and they thought they could do it forever because no one would stop them. She turned to face her bridge crew. We are going to stop them. The Keth surrendered, their ships powered down and waited to be boarded by human marines, who moved through corridors designed for a different species, searching for survivors, finding horrors they would never speak of afterward, rescuing Valanthi prisoners who had been prepared for processing and now stared at. They are human rescuers with eyes full of wonder and disbelief on the planet. Surface High Counselor Soren Kieth watched the Keth. Ground forces lay down their weapons as human soldiers surrounded them, watched as people emerge from hiding places and refugee camps and underground bunkers, watched the sky clear of enemy vessels for the first time in days. He wept for the millions who had been lost, and the millions who had been saved, and the strangers who had come from across the galaxy to protect people. They had never met Ambassador Park Ji-on, landed near the medical tent, and walked through the chaos, until she found Soren, and she looked at him with eyes that held no triumph, only exhaustion and grief and iron determination. It is over, she said. The Keth fleet is destroyed or captured. Your people are safe. Why? Soren asked again. The question that he had asked so many times and still did not fully understand. Why did you do this? Why did your people die for mine? Ambassador Park looked at the wounded Valanthi being treated by human doctors, at the soldiers standing guard, at the ships in orbit that had traveled so far to answer a call for help. Because this is who we are, she said simply. This is what humans do. Soren finally understood, and he knew that the galaxy would never be the same. The mining freighter Indomitable Spirit was the first human vessel to reach Sereth Prime, dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system where the Keth fleet hung in orbit like a swarm of metal locusts feeding on a dying world captain. Cho Min-jin looked at the tactical display and felt fear curl in his stomach, because there were so many enemy ships, 47 warships bristling with weapons, 12 massive harvester transports already heavy with stolen lives. His freighter had a crew of 18 and weapons designed for breaking apart asteroids. This was insane. This was suicide. Min-jun opened a broadcast channel to all frequencies. Keth Dominion vessels, he said, keeping his voice steady through sheer force of will. This is Captain Cho Min-jun of the human vessel Indomitable Spirit. You are ordered to cease hostile operations and withdraw from this system immediately. Silence stretched for long seconds before a response came, translated through the ship's computer into flat mechanical words. Human vessel. You are one ship against a war fleet. Your species is young and foolish and clearly does not understand what you face. Withdraw now and we will permit you to live. Min-jun smiled, even though no one could see it. I understand exactly what I face, he replied, and I am not going anywhere. Then you will die. Maybe, Min-jun said. But I will die standing between you and the people you are trying to hurt, and more of my kind are coming, so many more. And they feel exactly the same way I do. The Keth commander did not bother responding. Instead, he ordered a destroyer to eliminate the nuisance. The Keth warship was fast and lethal, designed for hunting down fleeing vessels and tearing them apart. And it closed the distance to the Indomitable Spirit with contemptuous ease. Min-jun watched it come and felt his fear transform into something else, something harder and hotter, because he had not come all this way to die without a fight. All hands, he announced over the ship's intercom. Battle stations. His crew responded instantly, taking positions they had drilled 1,000 times, because human vessels always trained for emergencies, always prepared for the worst, always expected that someday they might have to fight for their lives in the endless dark between stars. The Keth destroyer opened fire energy weapons, designed to punch through military armor, slammed into the indomitable spirit, and Minjun felt the ship shudder beneath him. Heard alarms screaming and metal groaning, and his crew shouting damage reports. But they did not die. The indomitable spirit was a mining freighter built to survive the asteroid belt, built to withstand impacts from rocks the size of houses traveling at thousands of kilometers per hour, built by a Deathworld species that considered space a mildly dangerous workplace rather than an alien environment. Its hull was thick and layered and reinforced, with materials that could resist forces the Keth had never imagined. Minjun rotated the ship to spread the damage across multiple armor plates and brought his own weapons to bear, mining lasers designed to cut through solid rock, meant for carving apart asteroids that contain valuable minerals, powerful enough to slice through planetary crust given enough time. The Keth destroyer had never faced such weapons. It had never faced humans. The first laser strike punched through the destroyer's forward shields like they were not even there and carved a glowing line across its hull. And the second strike hit the engine section. And the third strike found something vital because the entire ship shuddered and began venting atmosphere. The Keth destroyer broke apart on the command deck of the Keth. Flagship Fleet Commander Thasik watched one of his warships die at the hands of a cargo vessel and felt something he had not experienced in decades of conquest: confusion. "What is that ship made of?" he demanded. His officers had no answer because they had never encountered anything like this, had never faced a species that built civilian vessels like warships, had never imagined that a simple freighter could destroy a military destroyer in single combat. More human ships began arriving while Thasik struggled to understand what was happening, dropping out of hyperspace one after another and forming a defensive line between his fleet and the planet below. Freighters and transports and passenger liners, and even a few pleasure yachts. All of them armed, all of them clearly willing to fight. All of them crewed by people who had traveled across half the galaxy to defend strangers they had never met. It made no sense. No species behaved this way. No species was this insane. On the surface of Sereth Prime, the Volanthi watched the battle unfold above them and could not believe what they were seeing. Because humans were dying up there. Human ships were being destroyed and human crews were being killed. But more kept coming, and none of them retreated. High Counselor Soren Kieth stood in the emergency bunker and watched a human transport take a direct hit that should have killed everyone aboard. And instead of exploding, the ship simply rotated to present fresh armor and kept fighting. "What are they?" Miraveth whispered beside him. Soren had no answer. A human shuttle broke through the battle lines and descended toward the planet's surface. Landing near the refugee camp where thousands of Volanthi had gathered to escape the Keth ground forces. A young human male emerged wearing combat armor and carrying weapons that looked terrifyingly large compared to his body. And he was followed by a squad of soldiers who immediately began setting up defensive positions around the camp. The young human approached Soren and saluted in a gesture the Volanthi did not recognize. "Private Kim Tajan," he said. "United Earth Marine Corps. We are here to protect your people until evacuation can be arranged." Soren stared at this strange creature from a violent world. This soldier who had traveled across the stars to defend people he had never met. "Why?" Soren asked. The question that had haunted him since Ambassador Park made her promise. "Why did you come? Why are your people dying for us? We have nothing to offer you." Private Kim looked confused by the question, as if Soren had asked why water was wet or why stars burned in the night sky. "You called for help," he said simply. "That is all," Soren pressed. "That is your only reason. What other reason could there be?" Soren felt something break inside him. Something that had been holding back emotions he could not afford to feel. and tears began flowing down his feathered face because he finally understood humans did not help because it was profitable or strategic or politically advantageous. They helped because helping was what they did. They helped because they could not do otherwise. They helped because somewhere in their violent evolution on their deadly world they had learned that survival meant working together, protecting each other, answering every call for aid as if their own lives depended on it. And now they extended that instinct to the entire galaxy. In orbit, the battle raged on, and more human ships arrived by the hour, taking damage and giving worse, holding the line against impossible odds because retreat was not something humans considered when innocent lives hung in the balance. Fleet commander Thasik began to realize that he had made a terrible mistake. He had thought the humans were fools rushing to their deaths. Now he understood that they were something far more dangerous. They were protectors, and they would not stop coming until every threat to their charges was eliminated. His sensors detected a massive hyperspace signature at the edge of the system, and Thasik felt cold dread wash over him as a new fleet emerged into real space. Warships the size of small moons bristling with weapons that made his own vessels look like toys. The first of the United Earth Rapid Response Fleets had arrived, and it was only the beginning. The mining freighter Indomitable Spirit was 3 days out from the asteroid belt when Captain Cho Min-jun received the emergency broadcast, and he stopped everything he was doing to listen. A species called the Volanti was being harvested by the Keth Dominion. Millions were already dead or captured. The galactic community had offered nothing but words, and United Earth was asking for volunteers. Min-jun did not hesitate for even a moment before changing course. And when his corporate employers sent an angry message demanding he continue to the scheduled delivery point, he simply turned off the communication system and increased speed toward Sereth Prime. His crew of 18 gathered in the cargo bay as he explained the situation, and not a single one of them objected. Not the engineers, or the miners, or the cook, or the medic, because every human child grew up hearing the same stories about what you did when someone needed help. You helped. It was that simple. 12 sectors away, retired Admiral Bassiano stood in the command center of his old destroyer, the Unbroken Vow, which had been sitting in a storage dock for 15 years, gathering dust while he grew old on a colony world that felt too quiet after a lifetime of service. The emergency broadcast had reached him while he was eating breakfast, and he had dropped his spoon and walked out the door without even finishing his meal. Now he stood surrounded by other veterans who had answered his call. Men and women with gray hair and old scars and eyes that had seen things no civilian could imagine. And every one of them had come running when they heard that someone needed help. The ship's systems are outdated, his former first officer, Han Jisoo, reported. Weapons are functional, but targeting software is 2 generations behind current military standard. Can we fight? Seon-ho asked. We can fight, Jisoo confirmed. We might not win, but we can absolutely fight. Then that is enough. The Unbroken Vow powered up its engines for the first time in 15 years and joined the river of ships flowing towards Sereth Prime on the hospital ship. Mercy Without Borders Dr. Yunhana pushed her vessel to speeds that made the engineers nervous, accelerating past recommended safety limits because every hour mattered when lives were at stake. She had studied the limited medical data available on the Volanti species, and what she found made her stomach turn, because these were fragile creatures with hollow bones and complex respiratory systems and bodies that would break so easily under Keth harvesting procedures. They would need help. They would need so much help, and Hannah intended to give it to them even if she had to tear apart the laws of physics to get there in time. Her crew prepared for mass casualties, converting cargo bays into emergency treatment centers, training on Volanti anatomy using the few medical texts they could find, manufacturing specialized equipment that might be needed for species with such different biology, They did not know. If they would arrive before the worst happened, they pushed harder anyway. Across the galaxy, the communion of aligned species watched the human response with confusion and disbelief. Because this was not how civilized species behaved. This was not how the galaxy worked when a small and weak species faced a large and powerful aggressor. The proper response was diplomatic protest and economic sanctions and carefully worded statements of concern. Not a mass mobilization of civilian vessels racing towards certain death. The Lorothy ambassador contacted the human diplomatic station to request an explanation. "Your ships are not military vessels," she said, her translator struggling with the concept. "They are cargo haulers and passenger transports and mining platforms. They cannot possibly defeat a Keth War fleet. Probably not." The human diplomat agreed. Then why are they going? The human looked at her with an expression she could not read. Because someone called for help. But they will die. Maybe. The human said. But if they stayed home and did nothing while innocent people were slaughtered, they would have to live with that. And for humans that is worse than dying. The Lorothy ambassador ended the communication and spent several hours reviewing everything her species knew about humanity. Which was not much because they were such a young species and it seemed so unremarkable. Deathworlders from a high-gravity planet with toxic atmosphere and extreme temperature variations. Evolved from pursuit predators who chased their prey to exhaustion. Somehow developed civilization despite living on a world that seemed designed to kill them. Nothing in the data explained what she was seeing now. Nothing explained a species that sent civilians to fight impossible battles simply because someone asked for help. In the void between stars, Ambassador Park Ji-yeon coordinated the response from her diplomatic shuttle, which had become an impromptu command center as hundreds and then thousands of human vessels reported their positions and capabilities. She had served Earth for 30 years and had seen humanity at its worst and its best. Had watched them fight and fail and pick themselves back up and keep going. And she had never been more proud of her species than she was at this moment. These were not soldiers following orders. These were ordinary people who had heard that strangers were suffering and had simply decided to do something about it. Miners and merchants and doctors and teachers and retired veterans and young idealists. All of them racing toward danger because that was what humans did. Because that was who humans were. Park opened a secure channel to Earth and spoke 3 words that activated protocols most species did not know existed. Category 1 Humanitarian. On the other end of the line, General Moon Seojun of the United Earth Emergency Response Command received her message and felt a cold weight settle in his stomach, because those 3 words meant that civilian lives were at immediate risk and that the normal rules no longer applied. How bad? He asked. The Keth are harvesting a peaceful species, Park replied. Millions are already gone and more die every hour. Civilian volunteers are responding, but they cannot hold against a full Keth War fleet. Understood. Moon ended the call and began issuing orders that would mobilize the most powerful military force humanity had ever assembled. The 1st through 7th Rapid Response fleets would deploy immediately. The journey to Sarath Prime would take approximately 2 days at maximum speed. Until they arrived, the civilian volunteers would have to hold the line against an enemy that outnumbered them and outgunned them and had absolutely no mercy. Moon knew that some of those volunteers would not survive. He also knew that not a single one of them would turn back, because they were human, and humans did not abandon people who needed help. The Keth Dominion commander received intelligence reports about the approaching human vessels and reviewed them with growing amusement, because these primitives apparently thought that cargo ships and passenger liners could challenge a species that had conquered half a sector. He dismissed the reports and ordered his forces to continue harvesting operations. The humans would arrive to find nothing but ashes and empty cities. They would learn the price of interfering with the Keth. They would learn to fear. He was very, very wrong. The sky above Seraph Prime burned orange and red as another orbital strike hit the northern continent. And High Counselor Soren Keith watched from the emergency bunker with his heart breaking inside his hollow chest. His people were dying. The Volanthi had lived on this world for 12,000 years, building cities of crystal and song, creating art that made other species weep with its beauty, developing philosophies that spread across 100 star systems. And in all that time, they had never built a single weapon of war. They had never. Needed to Seraph Prime was a gentle world with low gravity and soft winds and oceans that never grew rough enough to threaten their delicate ships. And the Volanthi themselves were gentle creatures with hollow bones and feathered bodies and voices that could reach frequencies no other species could. Here, they were singers and dreamers and poets. They were not warriors, and now the Keth Dominion had come to harvest. Them Soren turned away from the display screen as another city vanished under bombardment, unable to watch any longer. And his assistant Myra Veth approached with a communication tablet clutched in her trembling hands. "High Counselor," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We have received responses to our distress calls." Soren took the tablet and began reading. Though he already knew what he would find, the consortium of aligned worlds expressed deep concern and promised to bring the matter before the Security Committee at the next scheduled session in 3 weeks. And the Merchants Guild offered to provide humanitarian supplies after hostilities concluded at very reasonable rates. And the Enlightened Collective sent their thoughts and prayers and a pamphlet about accepting death with dignity, response after response. All the same concern without action, sympathy without help. The galaxy was watching the Volanthi die and doing nothing. "There is one more," Myra said quietly, pointing to the bottom of the list. From the human embassy. Soren almost dismissed it without reading, because he knew little about humans except that they were a young species from a harsh and violent world. Newcomers to the galactic community who had only achieved faster than light travel within the last century. And what could such primitives possibly offer against the Keth war machine? But he read it anyway, because he had nothing left to lose. The message was short. "Ambassador, Park Ji-an requests immediate conference regarding your situation. Please respond at earliest convenience. No promises, no excuses, just a request to talk." Soren authorized the connection and waited as the screen flickered to life, revealing a human female with dark hair and darker eyes, and a face that showed none of the soft sympathy he had seen in every other diplomatic response. "High Counselor Soren Keith," she said, her accent strange but her words clear. "I am Ambassador Park Ji-an of the United Earth Diplomatic Corps, and I need you to tell me exactly what is happening on your world." Something in her voice made Soren stand straighter despite his exhaustion. Something hard and focused that he had not heard from any other species he had contacted. "The Keth Dominion arrived 6 days ago with a harvester fleet," Soren said, the words coming faster as he spoke. "They gave us no warning and no demands. They simply began bombarding our population centers and deploying ground troops to capture survivors. And we have learned from intercepted communications that they intend to process our people for biological resources." Ambassador Park's expression did not change, but something shifted behind her eyes. Something cold and dangerous. "How many of your people have been taken so far?" she asked. "We estimate 4 million, Soren replied, his voice cracking, "and they are accelerating their operations. Within 3 days, they will have captured or killed everyone on the northern continent." "How many Keth vessels are in your system?" 47 warships and 12 harvester transports. Ambassador Park nodded once, then turned slightly to speak to someone outside the camera's view in a language Soren did not recognize. A language full of sharp consonants and rising tones that sounded like commands being issued. She turned back to face him. High Counselor, she said, I need to ask you one question, and I need you to answer honestly. Anything. How long can your people hold? Soren felt his feathers flatten against his body in despair. Because this was not the question he had expected. Not the careful diplomatic inquiry about treaties and obligations and strategic interests. This was a soldier's question. 3 days, he said. Perhaps 4, if we can get more civilians into the underground shelters. But after that, the Keth will begin full harvesting operations, and there will be nothing left to save. Ambassador Park nodded again. And when she spoke, her voice was quiet but absolutely certain. We are coming. Soren stared at the screen. Unable to process what he had heard, Ambassador, he said slowly. I do not think you understand the scale of what we face. The Keth have 47 warships. They've conquered dozens of species. They are one of the most powerful military forces in the sector. I understood you perfectly, Park replied. And I am telling you that we are coming. Every human vessel within range is being contacted right now. And every one of them will answer. But why? Soren asked. The question escaping before he could stop it. We have nothing to offer you. We cannot pay for military assistance. We have no strategic value. We are just singers and artists and dreamers. For the first time, Ambassador Park's expression changed, softening into something that looked almost like sadness mixed with steel. High Counselor, she said. You called for help. That is all the reason humans have ever needed. The connection ended, and Soren stood in silence, not knowing what to believe, not daring to hope. Then Myra Veth made a sound he had never heard from her before. A sharp intake of breath that bordered on a scream. High Counselor, she said, her hand shaking so badly the tablet nearly fell. You need to see this. She transferred the sensor data to the main display, and Soren watched as icons began appearing across the system map. One after another, human vessels. They were coming from every direction. From mining stations and trade routes and colony worlds and scientific outposts. Some of them days away and some of them weeks. But all of them converging on the same point, Serath Prime. How many? Soren whispered. I cannot count them all, Myra replied. Her voice filled with wonder. But more appear every minute. Freighters and transports and passenger liners and ships I do not even recognize. They are civilians, Soren said. Confusion and hope warring in his chest. Mining vessels and cargo haulers. How can they possibly fight the Keth? I do not know, Myra said. But High Counselor, look at the energy signatures. Soren looked more closely at the sensor data and felt his blood turn cold. Every single human vessel, from the smallest shuttle to the largest freighter, was armed, not with weapons added for this emergency, but with weapons that were clearly part of their standard equipment. Weapons that humans apparently considered normal safety features for traveling through space. What kind of species built their civilian ships for war? What kind of world produced people who heard a stranger's cry for help and simply said, "We are coming," as if there was no other possible response? Soren did not know, but for the first time in 6 days, he felt something. Other than despair, he felt hope.